the first three episodes. We'll get into it. Before we do, me and you and of course Red Five Chris went to go and Kenny went to go see the 20th anniversary, if you can believe that, 20 years, 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith in the big screen. And
Right.
I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. You just sent me a message that it's the number two movie, which is crazy. That
Yeah.
here we are in spring, blockbuster time, and a 20-year-old movie's. Obviously, it's not going to make $1 billion or something crazy, but for a re-release of a 20-year-old movie that many of us already own, that's still pretty good to come in number two.
Well, I agree 100%. And I think, the message should be sent that, don't ever underestimate Star Wars fans for one. But I, I think the other part of that is, people were looking to, like always, trying to get away and what they may have is are good memories, especially maybe that generation that grew up with it. I know a couple of us were talking on the way out. For us, our generation grew up with the original trilogy. Those kids in their late 30s and 40s right now, they grew up with this trilogy. And so for them, this is kind of a special experience on top of the fact you've got just Star Wars fans in general and people probably looking to get away. And some of the other stuff out there, I'm just thinking just isn't that appealing to people.
It'd be nice if something like this could bring us together, but once again, in the internet sphere, there still seems to be a battle between older fans and new fans. Today, I was just sitting there reading online, people going back and forth. Some people criticizing the Andor show, and then other people saying, "Well, look, here you're getting more people going out to see." Because I'm enjoying Andor, but the truth is the ratings aren't there.
Yeah,
It's not doing very well.
right.
And of course, the older, quote unquote, some of the older fans are sitting there saying, "Look, you got a 20-year-old movie that's doing basically better business than a current supposedly greatest Star Wars show ever is doing right now, ratings wise." I don't know if you can equate those or anything, but
Well, I think what you can pull from it, and this has been through the course of history, certainly when you look at like a teenage, maybe even early 20s, but certainly teenage audience, or even certainly a child's audience, if they're going to see the movie for the first time on the big screen, people want something happening every couple minutes and they want something blowing up in their face, but what Andor does is as we discussed a little earlier when we watched the movie is, in my opinion, it does take us back to a little bit. It's an adult sort of theme show. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but it doesn't talk down to the audience, and it does get into politics. It does get into day to day life, and I think there's good reason for that. But I think what we're gonna see is there's always going to be that divide. You've got, especially with the introduction of social media and several other platforms over the last 20 years. If you look at the audience, I'm pretty confident that the numbers would skew a certain direction. Yeah, you're always going to find those kids that are literate and excited about maybe a deep thinking show, but that's what this is. And most people, I would say, especially those younger age groups, skew more towards just strictly action. And you get parts of that here, but it's just not going to be constant. And for the most part, I think the show holds up on a number of levels. It does take me back to the old days of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back in terms of, if you think back to those movies, the themes were a little more serious, a little darker overtones. Granted, not to this extent, but still, there was a tonal shift in Jedi when that came out. It was a little bit more lighthearted. Yeah, there were scenes intermixed and the underlying plot about Luke and Vader and all this, but it was different, especially when you introduce like the Ewoks. There's a comedic element to it, and not as much of that was present in the first two films. So this actually takes it one step farther. It's maybe it is only appreciated by an older audience, but it is what it is. But to your point, yeah, I'm sure the ratings are going to reflect that.
that is one thing you mentioned when Vader was being burned alive. Uh,
Yeah,
it's like, well, because we're going to get into the whole debate about whether. Spoiler alert, of course, if you're listening to this, obviously, I hope you've watched Andor already. If you haven't, go see that before you listen here because we are going to do spoilers. But there's the big debate on there's the rape scene, quote unquote, the rape scene from episode 3 of Andor, and like you were saying, it's like, well, it's not like they didn't have murdering kids and burning bodies, and it wasn't like Star Wars was
right,
adult or brutal in the
right.
first place. But just to wrap up my thoughts of Sith, obviously that it is my my favorite of the prequels. Which is funny because it is my favorite of the prequels, but it's actually the one I watched least because it's just so emotional. I have a hard time. I mean, I love it when I watch it, but I even today when I was there, I had tears in my eyes in certain scenes. I mean, I can admit it. It's just frustrating, especially watching Clone Wars and the first two episodes, and how much Anakin and Obi-Wan and all that together. It's just even now when I'm watching, I was like, I'm sitting there saying, "No, Anakin, what are you doing?" It's like, just go away with Padme. You just give it all up. Just go live it. Quit the order. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Right.
even now watching it. Of course, I'm being silly in a certain way because obviously we know what's going to happen. But so it is
Well,
my
would you
favorite.
do it?
I actually put it sometimes. I put it above Jedi in my overall
No.
list of movies
I,
and.
well, I think because it is you do see the actual sort of progression of Anakin turning into Vader, and that's I think certainly something I wanted to see as a kid is okay. So who is this Vader guy? You wanted to know more about him, and I think this movie clearly, even though the prequels were really about him, this movie really hammers into certainly his fall and kind of what comes after. But I hear you.
But overall, just to wrap up, what are your thoughts on the movie, just the movie itself, and where it sits in the grand scheme of the Star Wars story, Episode 3?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like you, I kind of bounce it back and forth between Jedi and Sith. As far as where that ranks, number 3 or 4. I think what 3 did a better job of is really advancing a larger storyline along. Jedi did what it, and again, I have a soft spot for it because the original trilogy is what I
Yep.
grew up with. But when you look at what it was able to do, it actually moved a big chunk of that plot along and filled in a lot of holes, throughout the course of the movie.
And for me, many times it's my third favorite, and there's a couple of scenes in there among my favorite of Star Wars altogether and of any movie. But that being said, let's move along.